Wilks and just started a Paris-based PhD in digital writing at Bath University, and I'm particularly interested in writing and creating and coding digital narratives that explore characters with psychological depth.
So I think the other reason why I became fascinated, kind of obsessed with text on the screen, is because of the advent of the tablets, the iPads, and etc. That becomes, making these works for a computer screen is not kind of ideal, because they're much more a reading experience, and they don't, apart from Underbelly's maybe a little bit different, they're not really necessarily kind of a cinematic or televisual kind of experience. And so when you have a tablet, I think that's a much more intimate, it's much more suited to a reading experience. So I think text is ideal, interactive text and interactive stories on tablet devices is the perfect match. And I think, as we've seen, that the game community is experiencing a renaissance in that interactive storytelling. So what I'd like to do briefly is just sort of quickly do a quick survey of the kinds of interactive storytelling text-based narratives that are available now. You may well know of some of these works, but Frankenstein by Dave Morris is created on the Inklewriter platform, which I think is an interesting work of interactive fiction, obviously based on Mary Shelley's story, and it's interesting that they, like I did in Underbelly, were using these old anatomical drawings. But I think it's interesting that the designers are, and in fact the Inklewriter platform is so wedded to the idea of the page, and paper is reproducing paper and book kind of styles is so important. We don't really have to do that in the digital realm, but it seems to be a very important aspect of interactive storytelling. The way the majority of works have been developed for the tablet devices. The second work that the Inkle team have produced and published is Steve Jackson's Sorcery, which is an adaptation of an earlier fantasy storybook adventure. And this is probably an iPad version. And again, we've still got kind of paper and cardboard. The design of it is based on board games. And again, the narrative is told on these strips of simulated paper, or kind of linen cloth in this respect. And so you've got all these icons from referencing board games and other analog games, dice here. And the animation, there's animation in it, and it's quite minimal, it's quite simplistic. But I mean, I think that's fine. But it's interesting for me that that cardboard and representing these analog, these kind of ancient, not ancient, but much older forms are so prevalent in the digital realm. Versu is an interesting platform for interactive storytelling. It's very, very book-based. It's got quite interesting AI behind it that's been developed by Richard Evans, and conversation modelling by Emily Shorts, who's quite very big in the interactive fiction field. And this allows characters to react in persona to whatever situations they encounter. So when you select an action, those around you will respond dynamically based on their moods, character abilities, and the narrative situation. I'm quoting from their description of their platform. Again, you have there are various different stories published on this platform, and they're using these libraries and books. They're referencing the world of books, and it very much is a book-like experience, a book-like reading experience. I'm just going to show little bits out of that particular work, The House on the Cliff. You can choose who to play as. And when you start playing, then you're seeing, it's very much like text that you would see on the screen, on the printed page. and you can choose different actions, and you know, the story is interactive and it changes depending on your choices. Interestingly, you have these little icons at the bottom of the characters, and if you upset somebody or make friends with them, their expressions will change. But the kind of icons, it's a nice reading experience, but I still think it's so wedded to the book. Fairy Tale is another platform for interactive storytelling. I don't think this one it seems to have been the same books there for a couple of years, so I'm not sure whether this one is still actively being developed. But again, this one by Emily Shaw, called B, I think works very well. It's book-based, it's a very bookish kind of form, but because of the story, which is about a girl who goes in for these spelling competitions, because the story world is very much about words and spelling, it kind of works very well in an interactive, the interactive reading experience, you being the girl, works very well, I think, in that one. Undone is another interesting platform for interactive storytelling, interactive fiction. It's open source, JavaScript and HTML5, and it's available on GitHub, so it's probably one of the tools that I'll be looking at and maybe forking, who knows. But if you're interested in again, the styling of it, again, is referencing books and the page. But the CSS is available, so you can alter that if you wish. But something that's quite different, another piece that I like by Smogo Games, this is a completely visual experience, which is the kind of thing that I'd like to see more of. As a reader player, I'd like to experience more of this much more visual media. There's no text in this particular game, and it's beautiful. The design of the interaction, the playability is lovely. But it's puzzle based, and I'm not very good at puzzles. I get stuck on them very frequently. Interestingly, with that particular piece, Year Walk, they produced a companion work, which is a book. Basically, it's an e-book that goes along with it. It gives you the stories that the kind of the game is based on, the Norse mythology. So it's a bit like, it's difficult, interactive narrative into a visual medium. We're not seeing much of that at the moment. To Be or Not to Be is actually a book. I've got the e-book version, which is a choose-your-own-adventure story. It's been hugely successful, was funded on Kickstarter and got, I think, lots and lots of money, much more than the target value. It's a retelling of Hamlet in a comic version. So, I mean, this is very much a book. And again, you can choose your character to play, Hamlet, Ophelia, or the king, the ghost. And you make your choice, you play them, and it's very much based on curiosity and humour of what the outcome. Here's another example of, again, a reworking of an older, this time a digital story game, an interactive text-based game. I'll quickly go through these. Maps, of course, are very important. It's not my cup of tea, but it's popular. Again, Monkey Island, very famously, an earlier form of interactive storytelling that they've remade, adapted for tablets. The visuals are obviously the prime. They're obviously way more important than the text. The text is essential for the story, but the text tends to be placed on top of the image. There's no real attempt to integrate the text within the narrative storytelling. And here it's even separated on the bar at the top, and of course these symbols at the bottom are the icons, these icons of the birds that enable you to move through the story. So here you have a conversation. You can select your options as guide, push, guide, raise, and you can have a conversation. So that's a fun piece. Most of these are aimed at, well, basically not my kind of, not the target demographic for these. The Walking Dead, I think, probably can have a broader appeal, and is quite a successful interactive fiction. It's animated, so it's quite like a movie experience. There's lots of cutscenes in it. But I do think it is true that when you have these options, these multiple choice options, you make decisions that do have lasting consequences. And I think you feel that when you're playing. At least I did. And there are a number of episodes, 5 episodes, and your actions do affect the story that you experience. So the gameplay involves meaningful decision making, exploration, problem solving, and the constant fight for survival in a world overrun by the undead. That is the experience that you feel. I think you often come to a halt in it. The story flow isn't. It's quite stilted, and some of the puzzles can hold you up, but it's fairly successful. It has been hugely successful. These kinds of click games, some of them can be can have quite good stories actually, and I quite like the way in this title sequence that the text is part of the diegetic space. It's integrated into the imagery. But then as soon as you get into the game, the text becomes the equivalent of subtitles, or it becomes quite intrusive on top of the image. Because really the pleasure is in experiencing and interacting with the visuals, with the image. Here you've got to find these items, hidden items in this, and that's basically they're based on that kind of puzzle. Text is used to give you feedback and information. Promly is a very interesting social simulation game developed by the University of California in Santa Cruz, which has very sophisticated AI underneath it, modelling social situations. In Prom Week, the player shapes the lives of a group of high school students in the most dramatic week of their high school career. And I think that is very, very clever and very interesting, but I think they've obviously put a lot of effort into that, into the underlying AI and the storytelling. The actual design of the interface, I think, is quite crude, and I don't think is as expressive as it could be. And it's quite busy, with visual material. So although it's very, very clever, I think that the way it uses text on screen, it leaves quite a bit to be desired, really. I think there's a long way that these kinds of works can go, which maybe they may be developing now. So you're just relying on speech bubbles and a lot of information, a lot of 39 Steps, obviously is a reworking of the John Goodwin's espionage thriller. It's a beautiful interface. A lot of work has gone into the visuals, but again the text isn't very well integrated. It's placed on top of the visuals. You have characters, for some reason, are these ghostly effects, so they're not represented like they are in Walking Dead. Animation is quite minimal. It's mainly stills, you have still scenes. The conversation is placed on the screen. You've got opportunities to explore the backstories of characters. Again, maps are important for moving around. Text is used quite crudely to tell you what to do, examine. And then you can read letters and so on. So again, we've got text is still on paper, and you have the text of this is the character the narrator really, and so now the text is presented differently, and you have the text that's coming up or fading, blurring up. And these ghostly characters, you can also explore. There's different options that you can explore, and in your inventory you can explore the characters. And that's based on. It's interesting that character cards are based on cards, playing cards, or like cigarette cards or something that you can those collectible items. Typewriter is a very interesting typographic video game where you're actually, again, it's simulating books, paper, but it is a game about type fonts, typefaces through the ages. And the game itself is not really a narrative, it is actually a game, but it's interesting from my perspective because you are playing with type. So you play as the two black dots, which are the two dots in the colon, and you have to move around as those two dots, and you explore type through the images. So you actually leap and jump onto, it's a platform game, you leap and jump onto fonts, and there's various puzzles and things, and that's the achievements, the path that you need to go through. Once you've gone through a level, then you're kind of rewarded by being given access to these historical texts about that particular font typeface of that era. Back to some of the work that I've been doing. This means that I won't show this one, but what I'm doing in this piece is it's an animated poem, really, that where the text is trying to simulate conversative mind. It's the poem is about two characters trying to communicate via social media. And so the type font is kind of a block to communication as well as a means to communicate in that particular piece. Rememori is, again, I'll show you a little bit of this one. It's a bit washed out, but I hope you'll be able to see it. This is a kind of a poetic game, in a sense, that's based on a character who has Alzheimer's, an old man who has Alzheimer's, and it's based on, I call it a degenerative memory game and a playable poem that grapples with the effects of dementia on an intimate circle of characters created in Flash. So first you have to decide who to play as. We'll play as the carer. The slow process of decay. For Cadbury, one of the first things to go. Can I make our memories match? There's no win-win here. What's the nature of the loss? What's the nature of the loss? Who am I? What's important to remember? Trying to locate this place. Return to it repeatedly. You show no interest. I won't carry on playing the game because it's there are 6 regions to it, but each region the game degenerates, it becomes more and more fragmented. And the questions are a combination of the thoughts of the characters, their questions, but also the kinds of tests that somebody who's suspected or is suffering from dementia would be asked to undergo. And the game degenerates until instead of trying to play a memory game, you're actually, and clicking those discs, actually, this is somewhere it starts to degenerate. You're actually, when you click on the discs, it punches holes in the brain, basically, so the brain actually disappears by the end of the game. I'm not sure that's some of them with animated text on it. The important thing for me about Rememori is that I'm beginning to use text. The way it's animated is kind of is simulating the. It's kind of emotionally inflected, so it's a falling motion, which is a sad kind of motion. There's a tenderness, I think, in the way the words animate and fall away and fade away. I'll move on to Incubus, which is a work that's been I'm working on with Andy Campbell, who is an artist who works in 3D. And this is an interesting collaboration from my point of view, because actually putting text into a 3D environment is actually quite difficult, it's proving. Not because, because you can't really put text in. Andy has to turn the text into images. even in Unity. We started developing this in CopperCube, but it's now moved to Unity. You can put text on the screen, but it's very much designed for the kind of the information, the heads-up kind of display. It's not really an expressive text. Hasn't been designed for expressive use, I don't think, in something like Unity. I don't use Unity, but the resolution isn't. I picked the wrong resolution. So unfortunately, it's going to get cut off. But so you can explore this 3D world. This is a girl's bedroom. And eventually. The question was, are you going to somebody's party? No, I'm grounded. You're grounded? Oh girl, that sucks. Why? What do you do? So now here's the play I have to choose one of the answers. So I sneaked out wearing Mum's favourite gold hoops on the last one. OMG. Yeah, so mean. They took away my mobile, restricted internet to exam fiction sites. Boring. How are you chatting to me then? Oh, I haven't. I have ways and means, haha. I looked at how to hack around parental controls. Connection a bit dodgy, but okay. Wow, you're like a real hacker. We'll be anonymous next. So, how do you know I'm not already? Don't get clever, it doesn't suit you. If you think I'm showing off, I'm not. Becky, Bex, are you there? Seriously though, KPC is not that hard. KPC? Keeping parents clueless. LOL. So I'll just this is still in development, so some of that needs to be tweaked. But I think it's interesting that what we're trying to do with the text is as you carry on in conversation, you become aware that you're not actually talking to Bex, the girl's friend. It's actually a much more sinister presence who starts to manipulate you, try to manipulate you. And then, if I get to the, I'm just going to get to the shortcut that I was put in, but these kind of develop, this wouldn't be in the game. So, once you come to a point in the conversation where you come out into the bedroom again, but now the bedroom's changed, and you explore 3D. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it very well because it's very dark. And in this 3D world, oops, past one. You come across some texts. I'm not sure I'll be able to. Oh, here we are. So the whole idea of this piece is that it's based on, it's influenced by the way that young girls are bombarded with imagery and encouraged to model themselves on digital ideals of femininity. So it's becoming even more insidious and oppressive, I think. These are impossible ideals to live up to. So within this 3D environment, which is actually the lair of the incubus, which is the malevolent kind of creature, you kind of have to fight these, we call them ad baddies. So these are floating around in this 3D space, and you have light emitting missiles that are also breadcrumbs. You can use a trail so you can find your way around the 3D space. But you encounter these adverts, these messages, and interact with them, destroy them, or this is still in development, so we're not quite sure what the mechanics, what eventually what we're going to do with the mechanics. But eventually, this is the 3D model in Unity. But eventually you come across the incubus's lair, and then you have the final confrontation. So the aim of my practice-based research is to create a text-based playable narrative with fictional characters who have comparable psychological depth and complex interpersonal relationships to characters in linear forms, such as the novel. Since a playable character must be constructed in code, I aim to use the affordances of object-oriented programming in JavaScript and its associated design patterns as functional metaphors to represent the psychological makeup of characters and their dynamic interpersonal and extrapersonal relationships. And crucial to that is designing an eloquent graphical user interface. In the same way that non-verbal communication has a powerful influence in human-to-human interaction, it's integral to my project that I design and development of a non-figurative or non-illustrative graphical user interface which can communicate eloquently via non-verbal feedback. These visual, sonic and kinetic modalities will work in intimate symbiosis with the dynamic text to affect the reader player's interpretation of character behaviour and of dialogue and narrative events, and therefore affect the choices they make as they progress through the playable narrative. I probably should stop there, but I'll just mention this particular piece of finding, which is from Nick Tater's course, Mind is Flat, which is a Future Learn MOOC course. In an experiment, people were shown this question, is Osorno a town in Chile? And they were much more likely to say, yes, it's true, if it was written in nice, clear, bold text, and much more likely to say, no, it's not true, if it was written in a very scratchy, hazy text, unclear text. And even more interesting, when asked why they believed that, no one mentioned the writing, no one mentioned the look of the text. They came up with all kinds of other justifications. So for me, that is very interesting, that actually the look of text on screen can actually affect people's choices or the way they think about things and what they select. So that's something that I want to explore. What I'm kind of basing my idea on, well, is that a character is like a black box. You can only infer what's inside a black box, what's inside another person by their behaviour, their outputs. So that's basically like a black box. And it's in object-oriented programming, we use encapsulation, which is just the technical term for a black box, basically, to organise complex code, and then using an application interface so that those modules can communicate with each other. Well, I'm thinking that you can construct characters in such a way that the details, the important things that you need to find out are encapsulated in the black box. You have to interpret what's going on in that character, or what their intentions, their motives are, what they're doing from their outputs. So that, if that can be modelled and in a responsive fashion, which I believe it can, then that's how the player reader will interpret that becomes a method of storytelling, or a way of telling a story. You have to, you as the reader player, have to interpret how that character is behaving, what their motives are, and therefore base your next choice, your next actions on how they're responding to you.
You mentioned Steve Jackson and the Make Your Invention book sort of predated this particular technology. as I understand it, those books are quite unusual in literary terms because pretty much all fiction is written in first or third person. The mega adventure books are written in the second person, as in you do this. What person is used for this kind of interactive fiction? Has they attempted to use second person like those books, or does it tend to lean towards first or third person?
In the field of interactive fiction,
Yeah.
both are used.
Both first and third.
Sorry, third and second.
So that's second.
Some people use second. Personally, I prefer to use third person, or even first person, but in fact first person. That's how will be working on some of my interactive fiction, which is titled Stitched Up. So you will be identifying with the character and playing that character, but it won't be addressing you personally. So it's not like first.
The character does this, not I do this.
You are in the way that you read a first person story. You will be reading and making the decisions for that character, but it will still be a first-person character.
Right.
In my particular one, Stitched Up, you're actually going to be playing as two characters. You're going to alternate between two different points of view. And there's a third character who is the black box character, you're going to uncover the mystery in that character. But each character actually is a bit of a black box because we don't always appreciate our own motives. So
that was my follow-up question. Do you have the same tradition you often get in computer games where the main character has amnesia and doesn't know their own life story?
That is a good point. No.
Or do you know your character's backstory at the start?
Yeah, that's I don't think the player needs to know all the character's backstory when they start, but the way I'm approaching that is that the characters have certain assumptions about they're a married couple who are, it's a psychological thriller, so one of them is actually wakes up and is held captive, and the wife is looking for her husband. She doesn't believe he's left her the club. So they will have assumptions about their marriage, their past history, which is being challenged by the situation that they find themselves in. So they're going back over their personal histories to try and make sense of what's happened now. And also because the character is also like an interrogator, sort of, yeah.